So, well, thank you for coming to the Magics of Books. I'm sitting here with Mr. Stanley Isaacs, producer, director extraordinaire, who's going to be a presentation main speaker at our July 25th, 2015 event. Mr. Isaacs, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in the film industry.
Well, it's a long story. I'm a writer, producer, director. I directed one movie. Actually, now I've directed two additional documentaries. I've been in the business about 30 some odd years. I started out as an associate producer on an ultra low budget film that thankfully virtually no one has ever seen. But it was a start in the business, and I was bitten as a kid, actually, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, when I watched the original King Kong movie from 1933, and it just captured my imagination for a whole raft of reasons, from the story to the imagination that went into the making of the movie and the technology. And I always, in the back of my mind, knew I was a creative person. I just intuitively sensed it, didn't know what to do with it, how to do anything with it. I was not a great student in school, because I was always thinking pictorially rather than literally. I never thought of myself as a writer. I studied art. I studied animation when I was in high school, and then I went to acting school and drifted around doing a lot of other jobs to make money, until ultimately, many, many years later, I took the plunge and went into the entertainment business. And like I said, I've been doing it over 35 years now. It was a kind of a serpentine. There was no straight line. I couldn't recount all of the different twists and turns it took to get me here.
What do you think your favorite part of the film industry, man? That you have all this sage
My
experience?
favorite part of the
Film industry. Or
I love the creative process.
Yes.
Let me put it that way. My favorite part is taking something from nothing and turning it into something. And coming up, you can be sitting having discussion about something, or I could be asleep or taking a shower, and an idea comes into my head. And then taking that idea and shaping it and molding it and building on it and creating characters and a story and forming it, and then pushing it through the sausage tube, if you will, and hopefully get something that's digestible on the other side. It's just, but you have to be mindful that it's still a business, and so all the creativity in the world, has to be tempered with the ability to be able to find a market and an audience for your product, which is, I think a lot of people mistake that aspect when you're getting into the creative process, because you're so consumed with, oh my God, I've got the greatest idea in the world, and I've got to do this, and it's just, who is it for?
That's right.
Who's going to see it besides your mom and dad? And then that's one of the compromises of being in the film industry. I think it was Woody Allen who basically said it's called show business, not show.
Yeah.
If it was just show, then you could go off and do whatever you wanted to do, and hopefully people would respect it and like it and come to it. But when you're dealing with the kind of money that is specifically today in the film industry, we're talking about spending $100 million to make a film and another $85 or $100 million to market a movie, you better be pretty close to damn sure you've got an audience for that product.
Sure. What do you think your favorite project today is?
That I've done?
That you worked on?
The documentary series that I'm working on right now, bar none. I produced, a couple of years ago, I produced a documentary called Tough Ain't Enough, Conversations with Albert S. Ruddy. For those who don't know, Albert Ruddy was the producer of The Godfather and $1 Million Baby, amongst others. He's got 2 Academy Awards for Best Picture production. And it's his story, him just talking to the camera about his life and career and how he got started and how the process worked, and anecdotal stories about the making of some of the great movies that he worked on. And when we finished the documentary, I realized, oh my goodness, there are so many guys like Al that are out there that are producers of some of the best films we've ever seen.
Sure.
And we don't know who they are, and we'd love to know the stories about how these movies got made. So I created the Film History Preservation Project, which is basically filmmaking from the producer's perspective. And I've shot interviews now with Alan Ladd Jr., who was the son of the actor Alan Ladd. He was one of the biggest box office stars in the 40s. And Alan Ladd Jr. was not only a producer of movies like Braveheart, where he won the Academy Award, but he was also the man responsible for saying yes to Star Wars, Alien, Chariots of Fire, and on and on and on. And he produced a bunch of movies with Mel Brooks. And so in my interview with Laddie, as he's called, I also have an interview interspersed in there with Mel Brooks talking about the process of working with Alan Ladd.
That's great.
And the other producer I just completed the interview with is a gentleman by the name of Mace Neufeld, who started out in early television and is the producer responsible for such movies like the original Omen, all of the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan movies. Most recently, he produced the Denzel Washington film The Equalizer. So he's up there in years, but he's still vital and present in the film industry. And I have 3 or 4 other producers that I've lined up that I want to capture their stories for the historical preservation aspect, plus the knowledge that they share about what it takes to be a producer and what goes into making a movie, and the trials and tribulations that you can't be taught in film school. And so much of it really boils down to common sense. You can't teach that either. But hearing these men tell these stories, and there'll be women in this series as well. I hope to get Sherry Lansing and Lauren Schubert-Donner to become part of this important series. Sharing their stories about what it takes, and when you run into obstacles, how you overcome them, circumnavigate them, blow them up, whatever you need to do in order to get the project made.
Yeah, sure.
So that's. So I'm really. I didn't ever think of myself as a documentarian. Mostly, I've done low-budget sci-fi action thrillers, and fell into this, as I said, accidentally after doing the first one, and now I'm driven because I feel it's vital to preserve our industry for the next generation. And these gentlemen and ladies are no longer with us. Their stories still will resonate as to how I did it, how they did it.
Sure, you can't replace that experience.
No, you can't. And it's stuff that can't be taught. It's stuff that has to be kind of like absorbed. The great compliment for Tough Ain't Enough, we won a bunch of Best Documentary Awards at festivals around the country. But the greatest acceptance of the movie has come from film students. We've shown it at several universities. And people have come up to me, and the 2 things that they say almost universally are, A, it's not long enough, we wanted more, which is great, because you want the audience to want more. And B, it's like, how come they never taught us that in film school?
Sure.
But you can't teach that, because it's practical experience. They can teach you fundamentals and the basics and in theory what you need to do, but when you're in the trenches and you have to become inventive and have to create something out of nothing, that's when a good producer steps up and solves problems.
Sure.
And that's why some of these movies are endearing to the public. The energy that goes into getting these movies made is astounding. You could power a city with the energy these people put out to get movies made.
What do you recommend to people who want to get started in the industry? How do they get started? How do they break through?
Wow. Probably as many people as there are answers. My basically, my first instinct is to say to people, study the classics, read books about filmmaking, watch great movies, learn, study what you like, understand what about the movies you see that you like. What are the aspects that you like? If you like to write every day. Write something, whether it's a poem, whether it's a short story, whether it's a limerick or whatever. Write. If you're an actor, study acting. Get involved in local community theater. Get involved. Work at your chosen craft as much and as often as you can.
So it's like any skill, anything, any skill has to be honed.
You have to hone it, right. First you have to determine, you first have to determine what it is you want, or what it is you think you want. Sure. The one thing that many people forget about the film business in particular is everyone wants to be a director or an actor or a writer. But there are so many other aspects to filmmaking, from wardrobe design to set design to music composition to cinematography. So if you're a photographer and you're interested in being in the film business, maybe you want to be a cinematographer. If you're somebody that likes to sew and has a creative sense of clothing, maybe you want to look into the aspect of becoming a wardrobe, or costume designer. The same with set design and production design. But whatever it is that you choose, seek out those people in your community. Not everybody lives in New York or Los Angeles or
Sure.
Metropolitan area that has wide-ranging opportunities, but every community has community theater. They have workshops of some sort, whether it's at the public library. You got to just make a concerted effort to seek out.
Find out what your passion is.
What your passion is, and find out those people of like mind as you in your area, and get together and work together and help one another. And in today's universe, if you're living in a small community and you want to be a filmmaker, all you need to do is have an iPhone and a computer with Final
Sure.
Draft, with Final Cut Pro in it, and maybe Final Draft to write a script. And for $4,000 or $5,000 worth of equipment or less, you can go out and make your own movie.
Sure.
If you're an author and you want to write a book and you can't get a publisher, you can self-publish. I mean, in the world we're living in today with the technology that's available to us, I almost find it inexcusable for somebody not to be able to put forth their passion. I think you need to identify your passion first of all, and then once you identify it, you need to embrace that passion. The key thing to remember, Ralph, it's going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot of flopping and failing and falling and bumping and ouches and oohs, and
as with everything worthwhile.
And you can't quit. I mean, if you think you can't go through with it, then don't do it. I mean, that's my biggest thing. If you don't think that you have the fortitude to stick out during the rejection and the hardship and the missteps, and don't get started, because it'll kill you.
That's right.
I mean, it's a tough racket.
Sure. With it's a lot of the authors in our group, that may or may not want to see their books to film. What would your suggestions to them be in terms of, from a story standpoint, how you take a story and you bring it to film, right? What aspects make one story better than another for going to film?
Wow. The first thing you need to do if you're going to attempt to take a novel or a story that's written and turn it into a screenplay to make a film out of it. You need to find out what the essence of that novel is. What's the heart and soul of the story? The key thing, I think, that's most important, a book is a book, and a movie is a movie, and they're entirely two different mediums.
Sure.
You have the luxury in a book of having inner thought, an expository conversation, and the ability to linger on character and uncover multiple layers of who these people are. And there's all the side stories that bring people together, kind of like multiple different highways that kind of merge at some point. In a film, you've got 2.5 hours at the most to tell your story.
Sure.
You've got to grab the essence of what the heart and soul of the story is, and the essence of who the characters are that populate the story. And almost always you don't have the luxury of having that inner thought process. Every once in a while you can do voiceover narration to help hold things together.
Sure.
But it's very, very difficult. I mean, there's been great, The Godfather is like a great example of translating a book into a film. Silence of the Lambs is another brilliant adaptation.
Sure.
More contemporary, I haven't read the Twilight saga, but people say that I've read the books that I've talked to, the younger kids, the movie's a pretty fair adaptation of what the book is. But I know that they captured the heart and soul and the spirit. You can't cover everything. It's impossible, unless you're making Gone with the Wind, which is a 3.5-hour epic, which is an impossibility virtually today in the economics that we live in. Gone with the Wind, if it was put in production today, would probably cost $500 million to make.
Right.
With the scope of what's in it. Although with CGI and the computer technology, you could probably do the scene in Atlanta, and I wonder how that would play today, because the flag is waving, the Confederate flag is waving. But when that scene where Vivian Leigh is walking through the masses of humanity, those were all people, or dummies. Today it would all be computer generated.
Yeah.
And it could probably be shot in Hollywood,
sure.
By a green screen. But still it would be an epic undertaking, and no one today, virtually no one is making films of that nature unless they have a cape. Unless they have a cape and they come from an alien world.
Yeah, sure. That's right. Yeah.
Those are the movies the big movies that are being made today. Yeah. The graphic novel, sure. Marvel, DC comic.
I also understand you like to work with mentoring kids. You want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. For the past several years, for 4 semesters now, the Motion Picture Academy in Los Angeles has been working with a group called Spark, which is a mentoring organization that helps troubled inner city middle school kids that are in danger of failing out of school. And they have different mentoring programs with different companies and industries in and around the country. And the Motion Picture Academy has joined forces with Spark, and they have what's called Spark at the Academy. And I've worked for 4 semesters now with some young kids that are interested in film and entertainment. We work different aspects, different members of the industry work with the kids, and some of them will work with them on designing costumes, some will produce little short films. I've helped with some kids in screenwriting, and one young man who I've worked with now twice, when I said, "What do you like to do?" and he said, "Well, I like to draw and I think I'm funny." So he worked out and did 2 hand-drawn animated films, basically working, again, another example of you don't need a lot of equipment to get something done. This young man, 12, 13-year-old kid, sat down every week with a stack of white paper, a couple of number 2 pencils, and a $40 light box that we purchased. And he traced and drew every single frame of this animated film.
Sure. And
then we photographed it in the camera, and then just ran it through an editing process in the computer. he sat there in front of a microphone and did his own ADR, which is dialogue and sound and sound effects, and we put some music into it. And the next thing this kid knew is he had himself a 1-minute hand-drawn animated film. And to see the expression on his face when we screened it at the Academy Theater up on a big screen,
Yeah.
the kid had been looking at it, in this small little imagery, and then 8 by 10 sheets of paper. It was incredible to see the light go off of this young kid's head, face, his whole expression. It was like he was glowing with pride. So when I see that, and I think, wow, this is great. I was in the Big Brother program when I worked with a young man. I'm still friendly with him. He's about 29 years old now, and I was with him when he was 6.
Yeah.
And to see him enrich his life, in part because I was able to kind of point him in a direction or fill a gap that was missing in his universe, was very rewarding. And as I've gotten older, I'm realizing I enjoy it more and more. I mean, it's very fulfilling. It's not about self.
Sure.
It's about giving to others, which in turn then feeds self. But the motivation is not about me. It's about the other guy or the other girl. And it's exceptionally pleasant and pleasing to see or to know that you've made an impact on somebody. It may have turned, and I might have mentored this young kid, could be the next Walt Disney.
Yeah.
You don't know.
You never know.
But he would have never had the opportunity if he wasn't in a program with someone that took the time to kind of say, hey kid.
As you know, part of the conference was to encourage young people to write, read, adults to write, read, and use their imagination to create, along the lines that you're talking about. What would your parting words of wisdom be?
Well, I don't know if I have any parting words of wisdom. I can tell you this. I wanted to be in film, I wanted to be in entertainment almost all of my life, as I said earlier. But it took me until I was in my 30s before I really took the jump into the pool. And what was really fascinating to me is I had gotten involved in this low-budget movie, as I indicated earlier, but then a friend of mine came to me and said, well, now that you've done a movie, and he had already written a couple of screenplays, he said, maybe you and I should see if we can come up with an idea to sell something. And we came up with a concept, and we formed a pitch, and we went to a friend of ours who was a graphic designer, and they did what's called a one-sheet, a poster. They did a mock-up of the poster of the movie, and we took it with us into the meetings, and we got a deal. My first writing deal was at Walt Disney Pictures back in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And we pitched the story, and the guy that we met with said, great, I love it, let's make a deal. And I remember going, oh my God, I never even wrote a postcard. I hated writing. I didn't even like to read when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was arduous because I was always a pictorial guy. And I thought, oh God, I've never written a script. I don't know how to do it. He knew a little bit. And so what was great is, I don't know if it was him or me or both of us said to the guys at Disney, we'd like to approach this process as if we're making an animated film. Can we please have a storyboard artist assigned to us that we can work with? And they said yes. And I must say, what was great was every day we would come in and meet with this man who had worked with Hitchcock and DeMille and some great filmmakers. And we'd sit there and say, John, here's the scene. There were two guys sitting in a room, and there's a camera photographing them, and they're having a discussion. And in the middle of the discussion, the door bursts open, and 3 armed guys with machine guns blow the room apart. Okay? We'd go away, and the next day, in our office, on the walls, the entire scene was drawn.
Yeah.
So I could then come in with my partner, and all of a sudden, I've got the pictures now. We could then, we wrote from the pictures.
Yeah.
And that was how I got my first jump, because I had never written. The guy said, yes, we want to make a deal, and I was panic-stricken. I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like baptism under fire, and I get the greatest training in the world. And I remember at the time, this is really funny, I still have it. There was an Esquire magazine cover. This was like in the early 80s. And it was a chimpanzee sitting in front of a typewriter. We all know what a typewriter is.
Yeah.
And he had a bottle of Perrier on the desk, an ashtray with a package of Gold Law cigarettes, the French
Right.
cigarettes. And he's sitting at the typewriter, and the caption said, "Is there anyone in America not writing a screenplay?" And I thought to myself, if a chimpanzee can do it, so can I.
There you go.
Which was that was my inspiration. I still have that magazine cover framed in my office.
Yeah.
Because that was like, the monkey, I'm no worse off than a trained monkey, I hope. Getting back to your question, what advice would I give? Work at it every day. Improve your skills. Get to know what you want to do. Become good at it. And one other thing that I will say, my last piece of advice, your work can't be too precious. If you fall in love with your stuff to the point where you're so protective of it, you're making a mistake. What I've discovered is in the process of writing in particular and in editing film, the thing that you love the most is the first to go. If you love it that much, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so just practice, practice, practice. You know, I'm not saying anything, whether you're a musician or a dancer or a painter or an architect, practice your craft.
Sure.
You know.
Well, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to the event, and you know, I hope we can encourage a couple of young people or some older people out there to follow their passion.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.